Welcome to Nocturne Historia. In this episode, we journey back to the twilight of memory, where myth and history blur into one. This is not just the story of a city, it's the birth of an empire, a legacy that shaped the Western world. From humble beginnings along the banks of the Tiber to the first sparks of power and ambition, this is how Rome began. Rome's story doesn't begin with cold, hard facts. It begins with wonder, with myth, with echoes of a world where gods walked among mortals. According to ancient Roman tradition, the city's origins trace back to two brothers, Romulus and Remus, born to Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and the war god Mars himself. A jealous king fearing their divine bloodline ordered the infants to be drowned in the flowing waters of the Tiber River. But fate had other plans. Instead of swallowing the boys, the river carried them gently downstream, as if cradling them toward destiny. They washed ashore on the very land where Rome would one day rise. There in the wild stillness of nature, a she-wolf discovered the crying infants. She didn't harm them. Instead, in a gesture that defied nature and defied legend, she nursed them as her own cubs. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus found them and, with his wife, raised the twins as if they were his sons. As the boys grew into strong, determined young men, they uncovered their true identity, royal heirs with a divine legacy. Inspired by their past and driven by ambition, they set out to build a new city, right where life had given them a second chance. But destiny turned dark. The brothers, once united in survival, clashed over the vision of the city's future. The conflict ended in tragedy. Romulus killed Remus in a moment of rage and became the sole founder of the new city. It was a defining act etched into Roman identity forever. Standing atop what would one day be called the Palatine Hill, Romulus took a plow and marked the sacred boundaries of Rome. That act, in the year we now call 753 BCE, wasn't just the birth of a city, it was the birth of a civilization. At first, the settlement was humble, a cluster of thatched roof huts overlooking the Tiber, surrounded by the mightier Etruscan cities to the north and the thriving Greek colonies to the south. But Romulus was more than a warrior. He was a strategist. He knew a city needed people, so he declared Rome a place of asylum. Outlaws, exiles, and refugees from across the region poured in. But there was a serious problem. The population lacked women. Romulus devised a plan, controversial, calculated, and infamous. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a grand festival, offering peace and celebration. But during the festivities, Roman men abducted the Sabine women to be their brides. This shocking act, later known as the rape of the Sabine women, was brutal. But in Rome's narrative, it was seen as a necessary step in founding a people. Over time, the Sabine families reconciled with the Romans, and the women themselves helped bridge the two groups, forming one community. For nearly 2.5 centuries after Romulus, Rome was ruled by kings, 7 in total. Each monarch left a distinct mark on the city's evolution, helping turn a modest settlement into a force to be reckoned with. After Romulus, the second king was Numa Pompilius. Unlike his warlike predecessor, Numa was deeply religious and wise. He established Rome's religious calendar, sacred rites, and priesthoods. Under his guidance, Rome didn't just grow in strength, it found a soul. Numa created the office of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, and built the Temple of Janus, whose doors would only be closed in times of peace, a rare sight in Roman history. Following him came Tullus Hostilius, a stark contrast. Tullus embraced war and expanded Rome's territory through conquest, notably defeating Alba Longa, Rome's ancient rival. After their victory, Rome absorbed the Alban people, setting a precedent for how it would expand, not by destruction alone, but by assimilation. One tale from this time tells of the duel between the Horatii and the Curiatii, triplet champions from each city, who fought to decide the fate of their people. It was a brutal but efficient way to avoid a full-scale war. Next came Ancus Marcius, the fourth king. He continued Rome's expansion, but with an eye toward infrastructure. He built the first bridge across the Tiber and founded the port city of Ostia at the river's mouth, Rome's first link to Mediterranean trade. Ancus also extended Rome's borders to include the Janiculum Hill, strengthening the city's natural defenses. The fifth king, Tarquinius Priscus, brought Etruscan influence into Roman culture. He began monumental projects like the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and Rome's first stadium, the Circus Maximus, where chariot races thrilled the public. Under his rule, the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's massive drainage system, was also started, turning marshland into usable city space and laying the groundwork for the future Roman Forum. The sixth king, Servius Tullius, continued the city's transformation. He introduced Rome's first constitution, dividing society into classes based on wealth and military role. This system, known as the Centuriate Assembly, would shape Roman politics for centuries. Servius also encircled the city with a defensive wall that embraced all seven of Rome's hills, a statement that Rome was no longer a village, but a rising power. Rome began as a scattered collection of small villages nestled across seven distinct hills: Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian. These hills would later become central to the legend and reality of the Eternal City. In the early days, these settlements gradually merged, laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most powerful and enduring civilizations in world history. Among the early kings of Rome, none cast a darker shadow than Tarquinius Superbus, also known as Tarquin the Proud. Though he commissioned grand architectural projects, including the magnificent Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, his legacy was tarnished by his cruelty, arrogance, and disregard for the Roman nobility. The tipping point came not through political upheaval, but through personal tragedy. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, violated Lucretia, a noble and virtuous Roman woman. Her devastating suicide following the assault ignited a fierce rebellion. Led by her grieving husband Collatinus and the determined Lucius Junius Brutus, this revolt marked the end of monarchic rule in Rome. In 509 BCE, the monarchy was officially abolished. The Tarquin family was exiled, and Rome took its first bold steps towards self-governance. The Roman Republic was born, an ambitious new system designed to distribute power and prevent tyranny. No longer would one man rule unchecked. Instead, two consuls were elected annually, each with the authority to veto the other's decisions. Behind them stood the Senate, a body of experienced elders drawn from noble families. While its advice wasn't legally binding, it shaped policy and preserved the wisdom of Rome's traditions. But this new republic was immediately put to the test. Tarquin, unwilling to accept defeat, sought military support from neighboring cities. Most notably, the Etruscan lord Lars Porsena laid siege to Rome in an effort to restore the monarchy. According to legend, a Roman soldier named Horatius Cocles defended a bridge against overwhelming enemy forces, holding the line long enough for his comrades to destroy it and prevent invasion, a symbol of unwavering Roman courage. Inside the city, challenges mounted. Though the monarchy was gone, power remained in the hands of the patricians, Rome's hereditary aristocracy. They dominated both politics and religion, leaving the plebeians, the broader citizenry, largely voiceless and often burdened with debt. This division would spark future conflicts, but even in these early years, the seeds of reform and civic identity had taken root. Despite its internal strife, Rome demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt and integrate. Drawing influence from both the Etruscans and the Greeks, Rome synthesized foreign ideas with its own values, creating a unique culture. The early republic established key traditions: rigorous military discipline, legal innovation, and a passion for building infrastructure. These would become the pillars of Roman greatness. By the end of the monarchy, Rome's population had reached approximately 35,000, a thriving urban center by the standards of central Italy. The city, once a loose collection of villages, was now linked by roads and paths that would evolve into Rome's famous streets and aqueducts. Roman society centered around the family. The pater familias, the male head, held near total authority over all household affairs. Religion also played a crucial role. Romans believed that through careful rituals, they could maintain the Pax Deorum, or peace of the Iualis, a divine harmony believed essential to the city's prosperity and survival. As you begin to drift deeper into relaxation, imagine those early Romans, farmers rising before dawn to work their fields, blacksmiths hammering tools, soldiers drilling in dusty courtyards, and priests offering sacrifices by torchlight. It was a time of modest beginnings and monumental promise. From the quiet banks of the Tiber River, this humble city was preparing to change the world. Though the grandeur of empire still lay ahead, the path had been chosen. The kings were gone. In their place stood citizens who dared to experiment with a new form of government, one that valued shared power, civic responsibility, and the belief that no single man should ever again rule unchecked. As Rome entered its Republican age, it stood not as a finished product, but as a city full of determination, ambition, and limitless potential. The monarchy had nurtured Rome's infancy, but now the Republic would shape its destiny. And in doing so, it would leave an indelible mark not just on Italy, but on the history of humanity itself. Throughout the early Republic, a deep tension simmered between Rome's elite patricians and the common plebeians, a divide that would shape Roman politics for centuries to come. The first major crack appeared when plebeian soldiers, who formed the backbone of Rome's growing military power, took an unprecedented step in protest. They withdrew from the city and gathered on what became known as the Sacred Mount. This bold move, considered history's very first recorded general strike, shook the foundations of Roman governance. With their city's survival at stake, the patricians had no choice but to compromise. They created a new political office, the tribune of the plebs, designed specifically to protect plebeian interest. These tribunes had extraordinary powers, including the ability to veto any law or decision that threatened the well-being of the plebs. More than that, tribunes were declared sacrosanct, meaning that any act of violence or harm against them wasn't just a crime, but a religious offense punishable by death. This was a turning point. For the first time, plebeians had institutional power to challenge the dominance of the patrician class. But political power wasn't enough if the rules of the game remained secret. That's why the next landmark reform was so critical: the creation of the 12 Tables. These were Rome's first written laws, engraved on bronze tablets and publicly displayed in the Roman Forum for all citizens to read. Until then, the legal system had been largely oral and tightly controlled by patrician priests and judges. By putting the laws in writing, Rome made justice more transparent. Though the 12 Tables still leaned in favor of the elite, they marked a vital shift toward legal equality and established the powerful idea that laws should be known and accessible to everyone, not just the ruling class. While internal reforms reshaped Roman society, the city was also expanding its reach across central Italy. Rome waged countless wars against neighboring peoples, including the Volsci, the Aequi, the Sabines, and perhaps most importantly, the wealthy and sophisticated Etruscans. A major victory came with the conquest of Veii, an Etruscan city located just 12 miles north of Rome. Its capture doubled Roman territory and significantly boosted Rome's economic and military resources. But Rome's rise was not without setbacks. One of the most traumatic came at the hands of Celtic Gauls. After defeating the Roman army at the river Allia, the Gauls marched into the city and launched a brutal sack. Much of Rome was burned or destroyed. However, a small group of defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. According to legend, a flock of sacred geese in the Temple of Juno honked loudly and woke the guards during a surprise night attack, saving the last stronghold from disaster. Eventually, the Gauls agreed to withdraw, but only after being paid a hefty ransom in gold. This humiliating event left a deep scar on the Roman psyche. For generations, Romans would remember the sack of their city not only as a tragedy, but as a call to never be caught unprepared again. And remarkably, Rome bounced back. The city was rebuilt with stronger walls and renewed determination. Within decades, Rome had defeated the Latin League, a coalition of neighboring Latin communities, and absorbed them into the growing republic. Some communities were granted full Roman citizenship, while others received partial rights. This policy of graduated citizenship allowed Rome to build loyalty among its new subjects while maintaining control. It was a model that would define Roman statecraft for centuries. Meanwhile, Rome's internal politics continued to evolve. A major reform came with the passage of the Licinian Section laws, which required that one of the two annually elected consuls, the highest magistrates in Rome, had to be a plebeian. This breakthrough opened the door to the highest levels of political power for non-patricians. In the years that followed, plebeians gained access to nearly all magistracies and even high-ranking religious offices. While wealth increasingly became the main determinant of political influence rather than noble birth, This inclusion of plebeians into the ruling elite helped Rome avoid the kind of destructive class warfare that had torn apart many Greek city-states. But as Rome's internal balance improved, its external challenges grew. Rome found itself locked in a series of brutal conflicts with the Samnites, a fierce mountain people of central Italy. These three protracted wars pushed Rome to its limits, but ultimately secured Roman dominance from coast to coast across the peninsula. This expansion brought Rome into contact with the Greek cities of southern Italy, known as Magna Graecia. The most prominent of these, the city of Tarentum, viewed Roman expansion as a direct threat. In desperation, they called upon Pyrrhus, the ambitious king of Epirus in Greece, for aid. Pyrrhus arrived in Italy with a formidable force, including war elephants, creatures that the Romans had never encountered on the battlefield. In a series of battles, Pyrrhus defeated the Romans, but each victory came at a staggering cost. These so-called Pyrrhic victories left his army too weakened to press on. After a failed campaign in Sicily and dwindling support, Pyrrhus returned to Greece, leaving the Greek cities of Italy to face Rome alone. Tarentum soon fell, and Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula south of the Po River. What's more, Rome governed its new territories with remarkable foresight. While keeping tight control over foreign affairs and military decisions, Rome allowed its allies to manage their own local governments. It offered various degrees of citizenship and legal rights, giving communities strong incentives to remain loyal. Rome also founded colonies throughout the region, settlements that both rewarded veteran soldiers with land and served as strategic outposts to maintain control. Through a mix of military strength, legal reform, and smart governance, Rome laid the foundations of an empire that would endure for centuries to come. After forging a powerful alliance system across the Italian peninsula, Rome found itself with a military advantage that no rival in the ancient Mediterranean could match. This unified Italy wasn't just a political achievement, it was a game-changing development in the ancient world. A large, centralized state with the flexibility to respect local customs, it gave Rome a strategic edge for generations to come. Soon, Rome's ambitions shifted beyond Italy, focusing on the island of Sicily. At the time, the western part of Sicily was under the control of Carthage, a wealthy seafaring empire based in North Africa. When a band of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines appealed to Rome for protection against both the Carthaginians and the powerful city of Syracuse, the Roman Senate faced a crucial decision. To intervene would be to declare war on Carthage, a naval superpower with centuries of maritime experience, something Rome sorely lacked. Nevertheless, the Senate chose war. This decision marked the beginning of the First Punic War, a brutal conflict that would drag on for over 2 decades. At the outset, Rome had almost no naval capability. But that changed rapidly. After capturing a Carthaginian warship, Roman engineers reverse-engineered it and built an entire fleet. To give their infantry an edge in sea battles, they added a boarding device called the corvus, essentially a gangplank with a spike, allowing Roman soldiers to storm enemy ships and fight like they would on land. The war was long and devastating. Storms sank fleets, battles were lost, and tens of thousands died. But Rome persevered. Eventually, Carthage surrendered Sicily to Rome and paid a heavy indemnity. It was a major victory, but the rivalry was far from over. The Second Punic War would test Rome like never before. It began when Hannibal Barca, a brilliant Carthaginian general, led an army complete with war elephants on an audacious march from Spain, across the Alps, and into northern Italy. His bold campaign stunned the Romans. Hannibal inflicted 3 crushing defeats at the Trebia River, Lake Trasimene, and most infamously at Cannae, where an estimated 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day. Despite these catastrophes, Rome never capitulated. Instead, they adapted. The Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus adopted a cautious strategy, avoiding open battle and harassing Hannibal's forces. Meanwhile, a young and ambitious commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, struck back by launching a daring campaign in Spain and eventually Africa itself. His victories pressured Carthage into recalling Hannibal to defend his homeland. At the decisive Battle of Zama, Scipio, now hailed as Africanus, defeated Hannibal, ending the war. Carthage was forced to surrender its fleet, abandon its empire, and submit to Rome's authority. With this triumph, Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. But Rome's appetite for expansion didn't stop there. The legions turned east, confronting the Hellenistic kingdoms born from the breakup of Alexander the Great's empire. Roman armies defeated King Philip V of Macedonia and later crushed Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire in battles at Thermopylae and Magnesia. Macedonia was divided into four client republics, and soon Greece itself fell under direct Roman control. The same year Carthage was finally destroyed in the Third Punic War, its city razed to the ground, Rome stood unchallenged across the Mediterranean. But this vast empire brought profound changes at home. The spoils of war flooded Italy with wealth, treasures, slaves, and land. The Roman treasury swelled and private citizens grew enormously rich. The influx of slaves revolutionized agriculture. Small family farms began disappearing, replaced by large estates worked by cheap slave labor. Displaced farmers, unable to compete, migrated to the capital in search of work, swelling Rome's population and straining its infrastructure. The Republic's political system, designed for a modest city-state, now had to govern a sprawling empire. Corruption flourished. Governors of distant provinces often used their power to enrich themselves. Meanwhile, victorious generals, backed by loyal legions, started to wield political influence independent of the Senate. These trends sowed the seeds of instability. The old Roman virtues, frugality, discipline, and service to the state, what Romans called mos maiorum, or the way of the ancestors, began to erode in the face of rising greed and personal ambition. As tension mounted, reformers emerged. One of the first was Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune in 133 BCE. Alarmed by the growing poverty in the countryside and the concentration of land in elite hands, he proposed a bold solution: to redistribute public land to poor citizens. His efforts would mark the beginning of a turbulent era of political upheaval that would shake the foundations of the Republic itself. His reforms shook the foundations of Roman society and cost him his life. Tiberius Gracchus was murdered by a mob of senators outraged by his land redistribution plans, marking the first political assassination in Rome in centuries. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus suffered a similar fate after pushing even bolder reforms, including subsidized grain for the poor. These events shattered the long-standing consensus among Rome's elite and introduced a dangerous new element into Roman politics: violence. From this moment on, force would become a political weapon. In the years that followed, ambitious generals like Marius and Sulla began leveraging their armies to sway political decisions. Sulla crossed a line never before dared, marching his legions into Rome itself. After winning a brutal civil war, he declared himself dictator, launched widespread purges through proscription lists, publicly naming enemies to be executed and their assets seized. Though he eventually retired, his actions set a chilling precedent. Power now came not just from the Senate or the people, but from the sword. Not long after, three influential men, Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar, formed an informal alliance known as the First Triumvirate, allowing them to dominate Roman politics. Caesar took command in Gaul, where he launched a brilliant series of campaigns, conquering modern-day France and even crossing into Britain. These victories made him immensely rich, wildly popular, and politically unstoppable. But when the alliance broke down, the Senate sided with Pompey and ordered Caesar to give up his command. Instead, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, famously declaring, "The day that that act ignited a civil war. Caesar defeated Pompey's forces and returned to Rome as its undisputed leader. He introduced sweeping reforms, including a new calendar, but his growing honors and lifetime dictatorship alarmed defenders of the Republic. On the Ides of March, a group of senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, stabbed Caesar to death in the Senate House, hoping to restore the Republic. But their plan backfired. Instead of peace, Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into further chaos. His adopted heir Octavian joined forces with Mark Antony and Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate. Together, they hunted down Caesar's killers, defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. The victors then divided the Roman world among themselves, but tensions soon flared, especially between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east. Antony's alliance and romance with Cleopatra VII of Egypt deepened the divide. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium, where Octavian's general Agrippa crushed the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The defeated lovers fled to Egypt and eventually took their own lives. Octavian emerged as the sole ruler of Rome's vast empire. But unlike Caesar, he moved with calculated restraint. Instead of claiming kingship or dictatorship, he maintained a republican facade, calling himself princeps, or first citizen. In 27 BCE, the Senate, filled with his supporters, granted him the title Augustus, a name suggesting reverence and sacred authority. Though the republic still existed in name, true power was now in Augustus's hands. Thus began the Roman Empire. The republic had lasted nearly 500 years, evolving from a modest city-state into the dominant force of the Mediterranean. Its political institutions ultimately failed to prevent civil war and autocracy, but its legacy endured. Ideas of civic duty, checks on power, and liberty would echo throughout Western history. And as Augustus stood before the Senate, pretending to restore power to the people, Rome stood at a historic turning point. The age of emperors had begun. They granted him a carefully crafted bundle of powers: control over provinces with major military presence, tribunician authority that allowed him to veto legislation, and a wide array of privileges that blurred the line between old republican tradition and a new political order. With this, the Roman Republic quietly died, and in its place rose what historians now call the Principate. Augustus ruled not as king but as princeps, first citizen, preserving the illusion of republican governance while exercising unmatched personal authority. His reign, which spanned an astonishing 41 years, laid the foundation for what Roman emperorship would become. Augustus reduced the bloated army from 60 legions to just 28, offering veterans land and pensions in colonies scattered across Italy and the provinces, thereby creating loyal communities and relieving pressure on the state. He transformed taxation into a more predictable, sustainable system. He built the first organized postal service, created fire brigades, and even formed a permanent police force for the city of Rome. Through grand building projects, he reshaped the capital's very soul. His pride in this achievement rang through history when he famously declared that he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. On the empire's borders, Augustus was just as active. In the north, Roman forces pushed Germanic tribes back beyond the Rhine River, although not without tragedy, as later losses would prove. To the east, he solidified Rome's frontier through diplomacy with the Parthian Empire, avoiding costly wars. In the west, Spain, long a region of resistance, was finally subdued, and the Danube River became Rome's clear northern frontier. Perhaps Augustus's most lasting achievement wasn't territorial or architectural, it was political. He created a blueprint for imperial succession, something the late Republic had failed to establish. Without a biological son, he slowly elevated his stepson Tiberius, grooming him in stages for leadership. When Augustus died, power passed smoothly to Tiberius. No civil war, no bloodshed. Tiberius was a seasoned general but an uneasy ruler. His reign began with restraint, competence, and order, but in time he withdrew from public life, retreating to the island of Capri and leaving Rome in the hands of his trusted Praetorian prefect, Sejanus. Sejanus had ambitions far beyond loyalty. He orchestrated purges, removed rivals, and consolidated his own power, until Tiberius finally discovered his betrayal. The response was brutal. Sejanus was executed, and Tiberius unleashed a series of treason trials that blanketed the Roman elite in fear and paranoia. Upon Tiberius's death, power passed to his grandnephew Caligula, a young man whose early reign inspired hope. But that hope was quickly shattered again. Caligula's behavior grew erratic and disturbing. He is said to have declared himself a living god and even considered appointing his horse to high office. Whether these stories are true or not, his assassination after just 4 years signals how deeply he alienated Rome's political class. In the chaos that followed, the Praetorian Guard took matters into their own hands, placing Claudius, an overlooked, physically disabled member of the royal family, on the throne. Claudius surprised everyone. He proved to be an effective, detail-oriented ruler. He launched the Roman conquest of Britain and expanded the empire's borders in the east. More than that, he extended Roman citizenship and, in a bold move, allowed Gallic nobles into the Senate, an early step toward integrating the provinces into the heart of the empire. But his reign, too, ended in intrigue. With Claudius's death, power passed to Nero, a young emperor whose reign began under the watchful eyes of two capable men, the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian commander Burrus. Under their guidance, Nero governed responsibly, at first. But as he grew in confidence and shed their influence, his darker tendencies emerged. He ordered the murder of his own mother, Agrippina, and is said to have killed his pregnant wife in a fit of rage. After a great fire consumed much of Rome, Nero blamed the Christians, initiating one of history's earliest persecutions. By then, his unpopularity had reached a breaking point. Rebellions erupted. Nero, abandoned and hopeless, ended his life with the haunting words, "What an artist dies in me." His death in 68 CE ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged the empire into a year of utter chaos, the year of the four emperors. In rapid succession, four generals, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, vied for power, each rising and falling with the shifting allegiances of legions. In the end, it was Vespasian, commander of the Eastern armies, who emerged victorious. He brought with him not only a new dynasty, the Flavians, but a welcome sense of order. A man of humble origins and practical sense, Vespasian stabilized Rome's finances and administration. He began one of Rome's most iconic architectural projects, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known today as the Colosseum. Built on the ashes of Nero's Golden Palace, it was a symbol of renewal, a gift to the people, and a lasting monument to Rome's resilience. After the death of Emperor Vespasian, the mantle of leadership passed swiftly to his eldest son, Titus. His reign began amid catastrophe. Just months into his rule, in the year 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted with apocalyptic force, burying the bustling cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath ash and stone. Thousands perished, and the Roman world was shaken. But in the face of this horror, Titus showed immense compassion and resolve. He led relief efforts, comforted survivors, and funded reconstruction. When a devastating fire later swept through Rome itself, he again acted with urgency and empathy. Though his time on the throne lasted only 2 years, his kindness earned him lasting affection. When he died in 81 CE, Rome mourned him not merely as an emperor, but as a man who had ruled with humanity. Succeeding him was his younger brother, Domitian, the final emperor of the Flavian dynasty. Domitian reigned for 15 years and proved to be a complex figure. He was a capable administrator who strengthened Rome's frontiers along the Danube and Britain. Yet his growing autocratic style alienated the Senate and many elites. Paranoia, rigid control, and ruthless purges came to define his later years. Eventually, his own court turned against him, and he was assassinated in 96 CE. With his death, the Flavian line ended. In a rare moment of political unity, the Senate elevated one of their own, the elderly but respected Nerva. Yet Nerva lacked a strong base of support among the army and had no heir. Recognizing the fragility of his position, he made a strategic and visionary decision. He adopted the popular General Trajan as his son and successor. This act of adoptive succession marked the beginning of what many historians regard as the golden age of the Roman Empire. Trajan, born in the provinces of Hispania, became the first Roman emperor from outside Italy. His 19-year reign saw the empire reach its greatest territorial extent. Trajan's military campaigns were bold and far-reaching. He conquered Dacia, modern-day Romania, bringing its rich gold mines into Roman hands. Then, in a series of ambitious moves, he annexed Armenia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Parthia, extending Roman influence all the way to the shores of the Persian Gulf. Though many of these eastern conquests would later be relinquished, they symbolized the height of Roman ambition and power. Yet Trajan was not just a conqueror. He was beloved for his domestic leadership. Across the empire, he launched massive building projects, roads, aqueducts, public baths, and a grand forum in the heart of Rome itself. He created the Alimenta, a welfare program aimed at supporting poor children throughout Italy, and governed with a sense of fairness that led later generations to view him as the ideal emperor, against whom all others were measured. As Trajan lay dying in 117 CE, he may have adopted his cousin Hadrian as heir, though rumors swirled that the adoption was orchestrated after his death. Whatever the truth, Hadrian became emperor and immediately altered Rome's trajectory. Unlike his predecessor, Hadrian believed the empire had expanded beyond its sustainable limits. He abandoned Trajan's eastern gains and instead focused on consolidating Roman strength. Hadrian spent over half his 21-year reign traveling throughout the provinces, inspecting garrisons, walking alongside soldiers, and reinforcing defenses. Nowhere was this vision more visible than in Britain, where he ordered the construction of a massive defensive wall across the narrow northern frontier. Known today as Hadrian's Wall, portions of it still stand, a testament to Roman engineering and strategic foresight. Hadrian was deeply influenced by Greek culture. He wore a beard in the Hellenic style, unusual for Roman emperors of the time, and spent years in Athens. There he completed the massive temple of Olympian Zeus, a project centuries in the making. His architectural legacy in Rome was equally impressive, especially the Pantheon. Its great concrete dome still awes visitors today. Upon his death, Hadrian's chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, ascended to the throne. His 23-year reign was marked by extraordinary peace and stability. No major wars, no upheavals. The empire prospered, and Antoninus came to be seen as the very model of a benevolent ruler. Continuing the practice of adoptive succession, he named Marcus Aurelius as his heir, with the condition that Marcus adopt Lucius Verus as co-emperor. Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher as much as a statesman, a devoted student of Stoic thought whose writings, meditations, still resonate with readers today. But his reign was anything but peaceful. Germanic tribes began pressing against the empire's northern borders, driven by unknown pressures from deeper within Europe and possibly even Central Asia. Marcus and Lucius ruled together until Lucius's death, after which Marcus bore the burdens of leadership alone. Adding to his trials, a devastating pandemic swept across the empire. Known as the Antonine Plague, possibly smallpox, it decimated the population. As many as 5 million people may have died, weakening the Roman economy, army, and morale just as external threats were rising. And yet, through all of this, Marcus Aurelius held firm, embodying the Stoic virtues he so deeply believed in. Despite the mounting pressures on the empire's vast frontiers, Marcus Aurelius remained steadfast. He not only held the borders but even envisioned pushing them farther, planning to establish new provinces beyond the Danube River. But all that changed with his death. Unlike the thoughtful emperors before him, who selected their successors based on merit and capability, Marcus broke with tradition. He named his own biological son, Commodus, as heir, a decision that would usher in a far darker chapter of Roman history. Looking back across the 2 centuries from Augustus to Marcus, this era stands as the pinnacle of Roman civilization, a golden age of prosperity, stability, and extraordinary achievement. At its height, the Roman Empire was home to as many as 70 million people, most of them enjoying relative peace and safety under the long shadow of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. A sophisticated network of roads stretching over 250,000 miles stitched together cities, provinces, and frontiers. These roads not only facilitated trade and communication, but also enabled the rapid movement of legions to troubled spots across the Mediterranean and beyond. Rome's cities flourished like never before. Public amenities were unparalleled for their time. Aqueducts channeled fresh water from miles away. Public baths offered hygiene and social life. Theaters entertained crowds, and grand forums hosted legal and political debates. Roman law, evolving steadily over the years, became increasingly humane and coherent, reaching across 3 continents and forming the bedrock of Western legal traditions. Culture bloomed alongside infrastructure. The epic poetry of Virgil in the Aeneid, the transformations of Ovid's Metamorphoses, the sharp histories of Tacitus, the vivid biographies by Suetonius, and the thoughtful letters of Pliny the Younger, all emerged in this vibrant cultural milieu. While scientific innovation didn't keep pace with literary brilliance, Romans excelled in practical knowledge. Their architectural designs, engineering feats, agricultural systems, and medical practices made daily life more structured and comfortable than ever before for a large-scale society. Perhaps the most world-changing development of this era wasn't military or architectural, but spiritual. During the reign of Tiberius, Jesus of Nazareth lived and died in a remote corner of the empire. His teachings, though initially marginalized, gave birth to Christianity, a movement that grew slowly, enduring cycles of persecution and tolerance. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, Christian communities were thriving in nearly every major city, laying the foundations for a transformation that would redefine the empire in the centuries ahead. The empire also witnessed a shift in power and identity. No longer centered solely on Italy, Rome saw emperors rise from provinces such as Spain and Syria. The old distinctions began to blur. Citizenship, once a closely guarded privilege, was slowly extended to wider groups, culminating generations later in the grant of full citizenship to all free men within the empire. Trade flowed across vast distances, connecting Rome with India, Arabia, and even China. Spices, silk, and exotic animals arrived in Roman markets, as gold and silver coins traveled in the opposite direction. All of this stability was supported by several key pillars: the Augustan political settlement that balanced emperor and senate, the adoption system that produced capable leaders, fortified frontiers that held back large-scale invasions, a tax structure and agrarian base that, while flawed, generated enough surplus to sustain nearly 400,000 soldiers and keep urban life running. And then, as Marcus Aurelius breathed his last on the northern frontier, few realized that this golden chapter was about to close. Commodus, unlike his philosophical father, had no interest in governance. Handsome, athletic, and obsessed with fame, he reveled in the spotlight of the gladiatorial arena rather than the halls of state. He donned the skin of Hercules, declared himself a living god, renamed Rome after himself, Colonia Commodiana, and demanded that statues across the empire bear his likeness wielding a club. He entered the arena for choreographed battles, never risking true danger, yet billing the imperial treasury astronomical sums for each performance. While experienced administrators kept the empire functioning behind the scenes, Commodus's paranoia and cruelty grew. Senators and high-ranking officials were executed on whims, creating a reign of fear and instability. On the final day of the year, a conspiracy among his inner circle took shape. Fearing for their own lives, they enlisted his personal wrestling partner, Narcissus. In the quiet of the imperial baths, Narcissus strangled the emperor, ending a reign that had become a farce. Thus ended the last emperor of the Antonine dynasty, and with him the illusion that Rome's golden age could last forever. After the dramatic assassination of Emperor Commodus, the Roman Senate turned to an elder statesman and respected general, Pertinax, to restore order. His brief reign was marked by a noble effort to reintroduce discipline and austerity, especially within the notoriously corrupt Praetorian Guard. But reform came at a price. When Pertinax refused to grant the soldiers a hefty bonus, they responded with brutal efficiency, killing him after only 3 months in power. What followed was one of the most disgraceful moments in Roman imperial history. The Praetorian Guard, rather than defending the empire, auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus outbid all others, securing the purple not through valor or legacy, but through cold, hard cash. His reign was short-lived, just 66 days, as outrage rippled across the provinces. Military legions, disgusted by events in Rome, backed their own leaders as legitimate contenders. Out of this chaos rose Septimius Severus, commander of the powerful legions in Pannonia. He marched on Rome, dismantled the corrupt Praetorian Guard, and established a new dynasty. Severus, born in Leptis Magna in North Africa, became the first Roman emperor of African origin. He spoke Latin with a very regional accent and was known more for his martial prowess than political charm. His rule marked a turning point in Roman administration, shifting power away from the Senate and toward the military. He increasingly favored the equestrian class for key government roles, further eroding the influence of the old aristocracy. Over his 18-year reign, Severus campaigned successfully in the east against the Parthians, carving out a new province, Mesopotamia, known for its fertile lands and strategic importance. He also journeyed to Britain, reinforcing Hadrian's Wall and launching operations into Caledonia, modern-day Scotland. His final days were spent in the frontier town of Eboracum, now York, where he died, allegedly offering cold advice to his sons: enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. Those sons, Caracalla and Geta, were meant to share the throne, but their bitter rivalry made any cooperation impossible. Within a year, Caracalla murdered his brother, reportedly in the arms of their mother, and carried out a damnatio memoriae, erasing Gaeta from official history. Statues were defaced, inscriptions chiseled away, and even coins were melted down to purge his image. Caracalla then turned his fury on Gaeta's allies, initiating a bloody purge throughout the empire. Despite his cruelty, Caracalla enacted a transformative reform, the Constitutio Antoniniana, which granted Roman citizenship to all free men across the empire. Though partly driven by the desire to broaden the tax base, it symbolized Rome's shift from a city-state elite to a true universal empire where citizenship was defined by law, not bloodline. Ironically, Caracalla met a grim fate himself. While relieving himself on the roadside during a military campaign in the east, he was stabbed to death by one of his own soldiers. The Severan dynasty lived on through the extraordinary influence of women in the imperial family, especially Julia Maesa, the sister-in-law of Septimius Severus. She orchestrated the rise of her grandson, Elagabalus, to the throne. Elagabalus, a teenage high priest devoted to the sun god of Emesa, shocked Roman society with his religious zealotry. He attempted to elevate his Eastern cult above traditional Roman gods, building grand temples and insisting that his deity be worshipped empire-wide. His behavior off the altar was just as controversial. Ancient sources claim he wore makeup, dressed in women's clothing, and even married a male charioteer, actions that scandalized the Roman elite. After 4 chaotic years, the Praetorians had had enough. They murdered him and tossed his body into the Tiber River, erasing another failed experiment in divine rulership. His cousin, Alexander Severus, just 13 years old, became emperor under the watchful guidance of his mother, Julia Mamaea. Alexander tried to steer the empire back toward tradition. He restored respect for the Senate, promoted legal reform, and aimed to present himself as a thoughtful, moderate ruler. But the world around him was becoming increasingly dangerous. In the east, the Sassanid dynasty had overthrown the Parthians and presented a far more formidable challenge to Roman power. Meanwhile, Germanic tribes intensified pressure along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. When Alexander attempted to negotiate with these invaders rather than confront them militarily, it was seen as weakness. His troops revolted and elevated a hardened soldier named Maximinus Thrax, a man of enormous physical stature and humble origins. A former shepherd from Thrace, Maximinus had risen through the ranks purely by battlefield merit. With little education and no aristocratic background, he represented a new type of emperor, one forged entirely by the sword. His rise signaled that in this new era, military strength mattered more than bloodline, tradition, or Senate approval. Though he was a skilled military commander, his brutal taxation policies to fund ongoing campaigns made Maximinus Thrax deeply hated by the Roman public. Hoping to regain control, the Senate backed a rebellion led by the elderly proconsul Gordian and his son in the African provinces. Their revolt was quickly crushed, but the Senate responded by appointing 2 of their own, Pupienus and Balbinus, as co-emperors. Maximinus, enraged, marched toward Italy, but never made it. His own soldiers murdered him during the siege of Aquileia. Yet the chaos continued. Pupienus and Balbinus were soon assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, who elevated the 13-year-old Gordian III, grandson of the earlier Gordian, as emperor. This dizzying turnover of rulers signaled the beginning of what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the empire nearly tore itself apart. In just a few decades, over 24 men claimed the imperial throne, most reigning only briefly before being violently overthrown or killed. Rome's once stable government had become a brutal contest of military power, where the loyalty of legions determined who would wear the purple. External threats worsened the internal collapse. Emperor Decius and his son were both killed fighting the Goths at the Battle of Abritus, the first time a Roman emperor fell in battle against foreign foes. His successor, Valerian, met an even grimmer fate. Captured alive by the Sassanid Persian king Shapur I, he was reportedly used as a human footstool before being flayed and stuffed as a grotesque trophy. Meanwhile, with central authority breaking down, the empire itself began to fragment. In the west, the Gallic Empire, stretching across Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain, broke away under a succession of military leaders. In the east, the wealthy city of Palmyra, led by the formidable Queen Zenobia, seized control of territories from Egypt to Asia Minor. Economic collapse accompanied political disaster, as repeated currency debasement to pay restless troops sparked runaway inflation. It seemed that Rome, after nearly 1,000 years, stood on the verge of disintegration. Yet even in the empire's darkest hours, strength and order began to reemerge. The tide began to turn with the rise of Claudius II, who earned the title Gothicus after decisively defeating the Gothic invaders in the Balkans. His reign was short, cut down by plague, but his military successes restored a measure of hope. That hope found a champion in Aurelian, who rose to power with the backing of his soldiers. In just 5 years, Aurelian accomplished what had seemed impossible. He reconquered the breakaway Palmyrene Empire, parading Queen Zenobia through Rome in golden chains, and crushed the Gallic Empire in the west, restoring the territorial unity of the Roman world. He built the massive Aurelian walls around the capital to guard against barbarian raids, a fortification that still partially stands today. Aurelian also reformed the currency, trying to stabilize the economy, and promoted a new sun cult, Sol Invictus, to unify the empire's religious life. His reign ended abruptly when a false accusation by a secretary led to his assassination by officers fearing for their lives. Chaos threatened to return, but a brief period of stability followed under Emperor Carus, who won victories against Persia before dying mysteriously, possibly from a lightning strike or perhaps assassination. His son, Numerian, was murdered during the return journey, his body hidden until the stench gave him away. In the power vacuum, the officers turned to Diocletian, a cavalry commander from humble Dalmatian origins. Diocletian executed the man responsible for Numerian's death and was proclaimed emperor by the army, fulfilling an old prophecy that he would rise to power after killing a boar, a pun on the Latin word aper, matching the name of the killer. With Diocletian's rise, the long nightmare of the 3rd century crisis finally came to an end. But though the empire had survived, it had changed forever. The ideal of the Principate, where emperors ruled as first among equals while maintaining republican appearances, was dead. In its place emerged a more centralized, autocratic regime. The emperor now stood apart, a distant and almost divine figure. Rome remained an empire, but it would never again be the republican disguise it once claimed to be. By the closing decades of the 3rd century, the Roman state had become a machine built for survival. Military needs now dominated every corner of governance. The army, nearly twice its former size, stretched across distant frontiers, from the Danube to the Euphrates, devouring ever larger portions of the empire's budget. To sustain this burden, taxation became heavier and more systematic. No longer did Italy enjoy special privileges. The distinction between the Italian heartland and the provinces had eroded. Now all corners of the empire carried the same weight, faced the same demands, and endured the same fears. And yet, amid the darkness of crisis, culture did not die. It adapted. It transformed. This era witnessed the rise of Neoplatonism, a school of thought championed by philosophers like Plotinus. His vision of a mystical, transcendent reality, where all existence flows from a single divine source, would echo profoundly in later Christian theology. Christianity, still an underground movement in the early decades of the crisis, began to spread more boldly across the empire. As traditional institutions faltered, Christianity offered hope, moral clarity, and community. It was no longer a fringe cult. It was becoming a major spiritual force. Roman law, too, evolved. Great jurists like Ulpian and Papinian refined legal doctrines that would echo through Western civilization for millennia. Even in the midst of economic decline, Roman engineering continued to astound. Aurelian's massive walls encircled Rome itself, testament to both Roman ingenuity and the fear of future invasions. Across the provinces, public buildings still rose, roads were still maintained, and aqueducts still brought fresh water to weary cities. As the 3rd century drew to a close, the empire stood battered, but not broken. And into this wounded world stepped Diocletian, a soldier turned emperor, determined not just to survive, but to reform Rome at its foundations. When Diocletian claimed the purple, Rome was a state in disarray. A half-century of civil war, usurpations, and invasions had drained the empire's strength. Yet in crisis, Diocletian saw clarity. He would not simply patch the cracks, he would redesign the entire imperial structure. Born to a modest family in the rugged province of Dalmatia, along the Adriatic coast, Diocletian had no noble lineage. His rise through the military ranks was earned through discipline, talent, and resilience. Perhaps it was this outsider's vantage point that allowed him to see what aristocrats could not. The Roman Empire had become too vast, too complicated, too fragile to be governed by a single man. Military emergencies erupted on multiple frontiers at once, each demanding direct attention from the emperor. Recognizing this impossibility, Diocletian made a revolutionary decision. He named a fellow general, Maximian, as co-emperor, bestowing upon him the title of Augustus and assigning him control of the empire's western half, while Diocletian focused on the east. It was a bold solution, but not bold enough. The crisis was too deep. So Diocletian took it one step further. He created the Tetrarchy, rule by four. Two senior emperors, called Augusti, and two junior emperors, known as Caesars. In the east, Diocletian appointed Galerius as his Caesar. In the west, Maximian was joined by Constantius Chlorus. Each man governed from his own capital, overseeing a quarter of the empire. Rome, long the symbolic heart of the empire, faded into the background. This new system allowed faster responses to crises, better management of local affairs, and, critically, a system of planned succession. After 20 years of rule, the senior emperors would step down voluntarily, allowing the Caesars to rise and appoint new juniors. In theory, it was a system designed to end the chaos of power grabs and civil wars. But Diocletian's reforms didn't end with political restructuring. He redrew the administrative map of the empire. The old, sprawling provinces were broken into smaller, more manageable units, nearly doubling their number. These provinces were grouped into 12 dioceses, each overseen by a governor, and these in turn were organized into 4 massive prefectures, one for each tetrarch's region. This multi-layered bureaucracy aimed to reduce corruption, improve oversight, and ensure the emperor's will reached even the farthest corners of the empire. Military organization followed suit. One of Diocletian's most radical decisions was to separate civil and military authority. No longer would a provincial governor command both tax collection and military forces, a change meant to prevent ambitious men from seizing too much power. The army itself grew even larger, but its structure shifted. Smaller frontier units were stationed in vulnerable areas, while a central mobile reserve was created, ready to march wherever crisis struck. By limiting the size of local armies and placing elite forces under the emperor's direct control, Diocletian curbed the risk of rebellion. His reforms were vast, complex, and often unpopular. But they worked. For the first time in nearly a century, Rome had a sense of direction. The empire had not just survived the storm, it had emerged with a blueprint for a new imperial order. With the Roman Empire stretched across vast territories, its military and administrative systems grew increasingly complex. To sustain these structures, Emperor Diocletian, known for his sweeping reforms, understood that the state needed a more reliable stream of resources. He initiated a massive empire-wide census, cataloging not only land and goods, but also people. This allowed the state to better assess its taxable wealth and to identify who owed what and from where. Recognizing the collapse of currency value due to years of inflation, Diocletian overhauled the tax system entirely. Instead of relying on increasingly worthless coins, he demanded payment in kind: grain, livestock, cloth, tools, goods that the state could use directly to feed the army and keep society functioning. Each region had specific quotas to meet, transforming the empire into a more tightly managed economy. To ensure that critical roles in society were never left unfilled, Diocletian instituted a rigid system of hereditary occupations. If your father was a blacksmith, you would be one too. If he farmed or baked or repaired roads, so would you. These professional obligations became binding, passed down from generation to generation. This approach preserved essential services, but at a cost. The state's grip on everyday life tightened. The dynamic free market economy of earlier centuries gave way to a far more controlled system where state needs overrode personal freedoms. Social divisions became starker. Citizens were now categorized not just by wealth but by legal class. Honestiores, the respectable, and humiliores, the lower orders, with each facing different laws and punishments. In an attempt to stop runaway inflation, Diocletian also issued the famous Edict on Maximum Prices. This sweeping measure set price ceilings on thousands of goods and services across the empire. But in practice, it was nearly impossible to enforce. Merchants defied it. Black markets thrived. In the end, it collapsed under its own ambition. In religion, Diocletian's reign took a darker turn. Though initially tolerant, he launched the most intense and far-reaching persecution of Christians in Roman history. Churches were destroyed, scriptures confiscated, clergy imprisoned or executed. Known as the Great Persecution, it varied in intensity by region but ultimately failed to extinguish the growing Christian movement. In a decision that shocked the empire, Diocletian became the first Roman emperor to voluntarily step down. In 305 CE, he retired and convinced his co-emperor Maximian to do the same. He retreated to his grand seaside palace in Split, along the Dalmatian coast, where he spent his final years tending to his garden, particularly his beloved cabbages. When asked how retirement felt, he reportedly replied that only someone who had been emperor could understand the joy of no longer being one. Yet Diocletian's carefully crafted tetrarchy, ruled by 4 emperors, unraveled almost immediately after his departure. Personal ambition and dynastic loyalties returned with a vengeance. Troops declared Constantine, son of Constantius, as emperor in the west. Meanwhile, Maxentius, son of Maximian, was proclaimed emperor in Rome. Rival claims emerged. Battles erupted. From this chaotic struggle, Constantine would rise. According to Christian tradition, on the eve of a crucial showdown at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine saw a vision in the sky, a cross with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, conquer. Whether a genuine conversion or a calculated political move, Constantine embraced Christianity and carried the symbol into the battle. His victory over Maxentius changed the trajectory of the Roman world. In 313 CE, Constantine and his eastern colleague Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. It ended the persecution of Christians and restored property that had been seized during previous crackdowns. While it didn't yet make Christianity the official religion, it granted it legal protection and imperial support, an enormous shift. Eventually, Constantine defeated Licinius as well, becoming sole ruler of a unified empire. Among his most transformative decisions was relocating the capital. He chose the site of the ancient Greek city Byzantium and transformed it into Constantinople, a city dedicated to the Christian God, free from the pagan legacy of old Rome. Perched between Europe and Asia, it held unparalleled strategic value and would remain an imperial capital for over 1,000 years. Constantine maintained many of Diocletian's administrative systems, but eased their harshness. He introduced a new gold coin, the solidus, which held its value for centuries and restored confidence in the Roman economy. His religious policies favored Christians, but he didn't outlaw traditional pagan practices outright. Still, the balance had shifted, and the transformation of Rome from a pagan empire to a Christian one had begun. After Constantine's death, his 3 surviving sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, divided the empire. But their rule was plagued by infighting, war, and religious controversy, especially over the nature of Christ's divinity, a conflict known as the Arian controversy. Ultimately, Constantius II emerged as sole emperor, but his reign was followed by a surprising twist: the brief rule of Julian, Constantine's own nephew. Known as Julian the Apostate, he rejected Christianity and made one last, bold effort to restore Rome's traditional religious heritage. It was a final flare of the old gods before Christianity's rise became unstoppable. Julian, often called the last pagan emperor, had been raised Christian, but eventually rejected the faith of his upbringing, attempting a revival of Rome's classical traditions. In his short 18-month reign, he sought to restore the old gods, revive pagan rituals, and reduce Christian dominance in imperial affairs. His death in a Persian campaign, however, abruptly ended this counter-revolution. His successors swiftly reversed course, reaffirming Christianity's place at the heart of Roman political life. Under Theodosius I, this shift became irreversible. The Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE declared Nicene Christianity the official religion of the empire, and subsequent laws shuttered pagan temples and outlawed traditional sacrifices. In a stunning break with Rome's millennia-old past, the rituals and beliefs that had once defined Roman identity were now legally and culturally abandoned. But religion was only one of Theodosius's challenges. The empire had recently suffered a staggering defeat at the Battle of Adrianople, where Gothic forces annihilated the Eastern Field Army and killed Emperor Valens. This catastrophe underscored the growing military threat posed by Germanic peoples seeking land and protection within Roman borders. Rather than expelling them, Theodosius made a strategic choice. He settled the Goths as federates, or allied troops, allowing them to live inside imperial territory under their own chieftains while serving Rome in military campaigns. It was a practical solution that replenished depleted forces, but it also allowed semi-autonomous, ethnically distinct groups to grow in influence within the empire. Over time, the Roman military itself began to change. Germanic recruits filled the ranks not only of allied units, but also of regular legions. While the stereotype of Romans outsourcing defense to barbarian mercenaries is exaggerated, there was no doubt the ethnic makeup of the army had shifted dramatically since the days of Augustus. Many of these new soldiers adopted Roman customs, language, and even names, but the image of what a Roman soldier looked like was no longer so uniform. Meanwhile, society was transforming in parallel. Christianity altered the cultural focus of Roman life, replacing classical civic virtues with an emphasis on personal salvation and humility. The prosperous urban middle class of earlier centuries declined. Imperial service, military life, and vast agricultural estates dominated the economy. Cities shrank behind walls, and their once proud monuments were either dismantled for building materials or repurposed as Christian churches and shrines. Yet this era wasn't devoid of creativity. Christian thinkers like Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine produced theological works of enduring influence, establishing a new intellectual foundation for the post-Roman West. In law, the Theodosian Code collected centuries of imperial legislation into a coherent legal system, preserving Roman jurisprudence at a time when so much else was in flux. After Theodosius died in 395 CE, he divided the empire between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Though intended as a temporary arrangement, this division hardened into permanence. The eastern and western halves of the empire gradually drifted apart, each facing distinct threats and developing separate identities. The East, with its wealth, urban infrastructure, and defensible geography, would endure for nearly another 1,000 years as what we now call the Byzantine Empire. Its citizens still proudly called themselves Romans. The West, by contrast, would soon confront crises it could not overcome. As the 4th century gave way to the 5th, the empire bore little resemblance to the principate Augustus had crafted centuries earlier. The emperor had become a remote and exalted figure, addressed as Dominus, Lord and Master, rather than the modest princeps of old. Ceremonial and court ritual elevated the imperial office to near divine status, shielding rulers from the population they governed. The triumph of Christianity had reshaped assumptions about the purpose of life, government, and human destiny. Yet for all this transformation, the empire still functioned. The same provinces remained within its borders. Latin and Greek remained administrative languages. Roman law still underpinned daily life, and most people still thought of themselves as Romans, even if the idea now carried new meanings. But the structure, the resilience, and the unity that had held the Roman world together for centuries were starting to fray. As Germanic pressure on the frontiers intensified, and internal resources, human, financial, and political, began to collapse, the western half of the Roman Empire would soon face a reckoning it could no longer avoid. The 5th century marked a turning point in Roman history, the beginning of the end for the Western Empire. Although the eastern half, centered in Constantinople, would adapt and endure for nearly another 1,000 years, the West gradually crumbled under the weight of internal decay and relentless external pressure. When Emperor Theodosius I died in 395 CE, he left the empire to his 2 sons, dividing it between Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Though they were nominally co-rulers of a single empire, in reality they governed increasingly separate worlds. Both young and inexperienced, they relied heavily on court advisors, Rufinus in Constantinople and Stilicho in Milan. This reliance led to power struggles and palace intrigues at the very moment Rome needed stability. The greatest catalyst for crisis came from far beyond Rome's borders. The Huns, fierce nomadic warriors from the steppes of Eurasia, began migrating westward, displacing the Germanic tribes who had long bordered the empire. Pushed to the edge, Many of these tribes surged across Rome's frontiers in waves too massive to repel. Among the most prominent were the Goths, who, after the death of their former leader Fritigern, rallied around a new and ambitious king, Alaric. These Goths, already living within the empire as federates, barbarian allies with special status, had felt increasingly betrayed and marginalized by Roman authorities. When their demands for better treatment were ignored, they revolted. Alaric's forces swept through the Balkans, alternating between negotiation and devastation as they pressured both Eastern and Western courts. Stilicho, a Roman general of Vandal ancestry but unshakable loyalty to the empire, worked tirelessly to contain the crisis. He used a blend of military strategy and careful diplomacy to manage the threat, but his political enemies viewed his growing power with suspicion. Both imperial courts feared he might try to unite the empire under his control. In a tragic miscalculation, Stilicho was executed for alleged treason in 408 CE. With Rome's most capable general gone, Alaric seized the opportunity. In 410 CE, his Gothic army marched into Italy and did the unthinkable. They sacked Rome. For the first time in nearly 800 years, the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign army. Though the occupation lasted only 3 days and the material damage was moderate, the psychological shock was immense. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, famously lamented, "The bright light of all the world was extinguished. The world perished in one city." Alaric died soon after the sack, and his followers moved on to Gaul and later settled in Aquitaine, once again as federates. Meanwhile, the floodgates had opened. In the winter of 406 CE, Germanic tribes including the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans crossed the frozen Rhine River and spilled into Gaul. Over the coming years, they pushed deeper into Roman territory, eventually carving out their own kingdoms in what is now France and Spain. Rome, now governed from the more defensible city of Ravenna, struggled to respond to the cascading crises. Real authority no longer rested with the emperor, but with powerful generals who held the title Master of Soldiers. Chief among them was Flavius Aetius, a battle-hardened commander often called the last of the Romans. For nearly 2 decades, Aetius held the Western Empire together through a mix of military strength and political skill. But new threats continued to arise. In North Africa, the Vandals under King Gaiseric crossed from Spain and seized control of the empire's wealthiest provinces. By capturing Carthage in 439 CE, they not only deprived Rome of its vital grain supply, but also established a naval power that would dominate the Western Mediterranean. As if that weren't enough, Rome's most terrifying enemy was yet to come, Attila the Hun. Having already devastated parts of the Eastern Empire, Attila turned his sights westward. In 451 CE, he invaded Gaul. In response, Aetius forged a desperate alliance of Roman forces and Germanic federates, including the Visigoths, to confront the Huns. At the bloody Battle of the Catalonian Plains, they managed to halt Attila's advance. It was one of the last great victories of the Western Empire. But Attila was not finished. The following year, he invaded Italy, devastating the countryside and threatening the heart of Roman power. As panic spread, a remarkable event occurred. Pope Leo III personally met Attila and persuaded him to turn back. While later Christian writers credited divine intervention, more pragmatic explanations include outbreaks of disease in Attila's camp, a lack of food supplies, and possible bribes from the Eastern court. Whatever the reason, Attila's withdrawal spared Rome another catastrophe, though the empire itself continued its slow and inexorable decline. Attila's sudden death, not long after his devastating campaign, brought a fleeting moment of relief to the crumbling Western Roman Empire. But any hope of recovery was short-lived. In that very same year, a palace conspiracy ended with the assassination of the powerful general Aetius, on the direct orders of Emperor Valentinian III. A few months later, Valentinian himself was murdered by Aetius's enraged supporters, putting an end to the once mighty Theodosian dynasty in the West. What followed was a whirlwind of chaos, emperor after emperor rising and falling in rapid succession, many mere figureheads controlled by ambitious generals or military factions. Among them was Majorian, who stood out as the last ruler to genuinely attempt to revive Rome's strength. He worked to rebuild the military, reform the administration, and retake lost provinces like North Africa from the Vandals. But his efforts were crushed. Defeated and executed, Majorian's failure marked the end of serious imperial recovery efforts. After him, Western emperors ruled little more than Italy itself. The provinces had fractured, with Germanic kingdoms establishing de facto independence. In Spain, the Suebi dominated the northwest, while the Visigoths extended their reach from Aquitaine into Iberia. In Gaul, the Burgundians carved out their own domain in the southeast, and the Franks steadily grew in power across the northern frontier. Meanwhile, Britain had long since been abandoned by Roman troops and evolved into a post-imperial society, where Saxon settlers increasingly took hold. By the latter half of the 5th century, the authority of the Western Roman emperors had become largely symbolic, irrelevant to the lives of most citizens across the former empire. Real control in Italy belonged to military strongmen like Ricimer, and later to his successors, including Orestes. Orestes, a former Roman general, placed his young son Romulus on the throne, a teenager who wielded no real authority. The Germanic troops stationed in Italy, particularly those from the Scicri and Heruli tribes, demanded land grants like those already offered to other federated peoples across the empire. When Orestes refused, the soldiers turned to one of their own, Odoacer, a seasoned Germanic officer in Roman service. Rallying his followers, Odoacer marched on Ravenna, captured and executed Orestes, and deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus in 476. With that act, the Western Roman Empire, at least in name, came to an end. But Odoacer didn't claim the title of emperor. Instead, in a shrewd diplomatic move, he sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. By doing so, he acknowledged the supremacy of the Eastern court while effectively ruling Italy as king. Zeno granted him the title of patrician, making Odoacer nominally his representative, though in reality he was now sovereign of the West. As for Romulus Augustulus, still just a teenager, he was not executed or imprisoned, but quietly retired to a country villa with a generous pension. It was an unexpectedly gentle conclusion for the final Western Roman emperor. This moment, Odoacer's seizure of power and the quiet retirement of Romulus, is traditionally marked as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Yet for the people living through it, there was no sudden apocalypse. There was no thunderclap to announce the end of an age. Roman civilization did not disappear. It simply changed hands. Germanic rulers, though foreign, continued many Roman practices. They issued laws modeled on Roman legal codes, maintained tax systems, though increasingly localized, and employed Roman bureaucrats to run their administrations. Latin remained the language of law and governance. Roman infrastructure, from aqueducts to roads to forums, still served daily life. The Catholic Church, deeply rooted in Roman structure and thought, carried forward imperial organization, legal concepts, and even political influence. So why did the Western Empire collapse while the East endured? Geography played a part. The West faced more vulnerable land borders and more frequent invasions. Its economy was less urbanized, more reliant on agriculture, and had already suffered from the loss of wealthy provinces like North Africa and parts of Gaul, key to sustaining its treasury. With fewer resources, the Western Empire was ill-equipped to resist pressures that the East managed to survive. Moreover, legitimacy in the West had eroded badly. Civil wars, usurpations, and the sack of Rome in 410 shattered the psychological bedrock of the imperial idea. People no longer believed in Rome's divine destiny. But even as emperors fell and borders shifted, Roman identity, Romanitas, endured. It lived on in language, in customs, in law, and in the church. While the Western Empire had fallen, the Roman world persisted. In many ways, the empire didn't collapse. It evolved. In the Eastern Mediterranean, long after the western half of the empire had faded into history, the Roman world still thrived from its gleaming capital at Constantinople. Here, emperors like Zeno and his successors held fast to the belief that they were the rightful rulers of the entire Roman world, including the western provinces that had slipped away. They saw the fall of the West not as an end, but as a temporary setback, something to be reversed. In Italy, Odoacer's control would prove short-lived. Emperor Zeno authorized Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths, to invade and depose him. Theodoric not only succeeded in defeating and ultimately killing Odoacer, but he also established one of the most stable and culturally blended kingdoms of the early post-Roman West. His reign in Italy fused Roman administrative traditions with Germanic customs, creating a model that echoed through the emerging medieval world. As Western Europe slowly transformed, the memory and authority of Rome remained powerful. Germanic rulers eagerly sought recognition from Constantinople and adopted Roman titles to legitimize their authority. With imperial governance gone, the church stepped in, filling the administrative vacuum and providing a sense of continuity. Even as the Latin-speaking Western Empire fractured in the East, the Roman Empire endured, Greek-speaking, Christian, and deeply rooted in Roman tradition. Despite the symbolic fall of the Western Roman Empire, there was no single catastrophic collapse. Instead, it was a gradual transition, a shift in the flow of history. The institutions established by Augustus 5 centuries earlier had failed in the West, but Roman civilization did not vanish. Like a mighty river encountering a mountain, it split and carved new paths, continuing on into the medieval world. While Romulus Augustulus was deposed in the West, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, continued to flourish. But the people of this realm never used the term Byzantine Semiticum. They called themselves Romans, Romaoi in their Greek tongue, true heirs to Caesar, Augustus, and Constantine. For nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West, they upheld and reimagined the Roman legacy. As the 5th century came to a close, Emperor Zeno faced severe internal challenges. Disputes over the nature of Christ created deep divisions among Christians, while Zeno's court became increasingly dominated by his fellow Isaurians, men from his rugged homeland, causing unrest in Constantinople. Still, the Eastern Empire held firm, sustained by effective taxation, a functioning bureaucracy, and professional armies. These were assets the crumbling West could only envy. Zeno's successor, Emperor Anastasius, brought stability and reform during his 27-year reign. A capable administrator, he restored the treasury and ordered the construction of the Long Walls, fortifications that protected Constantinople from landward invasion. Though religious disputes continued to stir unrest, Anastasius preserved the Eastern Empire's strength and kept the Persian threat in check. Then came the golden age of the Eastern Roman Empire, marked by the reign of Justinian Verus. Born to Latin-speaking peasants in the Balkans, Justinian rose through the ranks, eventually marrying the brilliant and controversial Theodora. Her rise from actress to empress shocked Rome's elite, but she became Justinian's fiercest ally and one of the most powerful women in imperial history. Justinian's ambition reached far beyond Constantinople. He dreamed of restoring the empire to its former glory. To that end, he dispatched his most trusted general, Belisarius, to reconquer North Africa from the Vandals. Belisarius executed the campaign with stunning efficiency, swiftly reclaiming the region and returning its grain-rich lands to imperial control. Encouraged by this victory, Justinian turned his sights on Italy, launching an invasion against the Ostrogoths. But unlike the African campaign, Italy would not fall so easily. What was intended as a rapid reconquest turned into a drawn-out 20-year war. The struggle devastated the Italian peninsula, once the very heart of the Roman Empire. Cities were ravaged, populations displaced, and economies shattered. Though Ravenna was eventually retaken and the last Gothic holdouts defeated, the victory came at a steep price. Parts of Spain were also brought back under imperial control, but Justinian's dream of fully restoring the Western Roman Empire remained incomplete. These military ventures strained the imperial treasury and coincided with renewed hostilities against Persia. And then came disaster in the form of plague. The bubonic plague struck Constantinople with brutal force, killing as much as 40% of the city's population and spreading across the empire. The pandemic crippled trade, undermined administration, and left entire regions reeling. Yet even amid catastrophe, the Eastern Roman Empire endured. Justinian's reign stands as both a triumph of vision and a cautionary tale of ambition pushed to the limits. His legacy was monumental. His legal reforms, architectural projects like Hagia Sophia, and military campaigns shaped the course of history. But his empire paid a heavy price for those dreams. And still, through plague, war, and political upheaval, the Roman flame continued to burn in the East, lighting the path to the medieval world. By the mid-6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire under Emperor Justinian faced one of the greatest demographic disasters in its history. A devastating plague swept through the empire, reducing its population by millions. This catastrophe didn't just affect everyday life. It crippled the economy. slashed tax revenues, and severely undermined military recruitment. The aftershocks of this event would ripple through the empire for decades, creating fiscal burdens that haunted Justinian's successors. Yet despite the overwhelming challenges, Justinian's reign stood out as one of extraordinary accomplishment. Among his most iconic legacies was the construction of the Hagia Sophia, a masterpiece of engineering and sacred architecture. Its revolutionary dome, spanning 108 feet, still inspires awe and stands today as one of the crowning achievements of world architecture. But Justinian's legacy wasn't only built in stone. Perhaps even more enduring was his legal reform. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law, represented a monumental codification of Roman law. It systematized centuries of legal tradition, ensuring the survival of Roman jurisprudence for future civilizations. In time, it would influence the development of legal systems across Europe and beyond, standing as one of Rome's greatest contributions to the modern world. After Justinian's death, however, the empire entered a troubled phase. His immediate successor, Justin II, proved unable to hold on to Italy, which fell into the hands of the Lombards. Ongoing warfare with the Persian Empire further strained imperial resources. Later emperors like Tiberius II and Maurice fought valiantly to maintain the empire's frontiers, but their efforts were hampered by economic exhaustion. Maurice's unpopular military reforms, intended to stretch the empire's resources, ultimately led to his downfall. He was overthrown and executed by the usurper Phocas, whose reign ushered in further instability. In the 7th century, the empire was nearly brought to its knees. Under the aggressive Shah Khosrow II, the Persian Empire launched a massive invasion, capturing a vast swath of territory: Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. Jerusalem itself fell, and the Persians seized the true cross, Christianity's most sacred relic, and carried it triumphantly back to Persia. Persian forces even reached the Bosporus, setting their sights on Constantinople itself. Amid this crisis, a new leader rose. Heraclius, who had overthrown the tyrant Phocas, took the extraordinary step of personally leading Roman armies deep into enemy territory. Through a series of daring and well-executed campaigns, he turned the tide. Heraclius reclaimed lost provinces, defeated the Persians, and restored the true cross to Jerusalem. It was a triumph that seemed to guarantee lasting peace and security. But even as Heraclius celebrated, an even more formidable force was rising in the Arabian desert. United under the Prophet Muhammad and fueled by the new religion of Islam, Arab armies swept through both Roman and Persian lands with astonishing speed. The already weakened Persian Empire collapsed entirely. Meanwhile, Roman forces suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk. Within 10 years, the empire lost Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, provinces that had been Roman for over 6 centuries. These losses reshaped the empire forever. What remained was smaller, more defensible, and centered on Constantinople, Asia Minor, and the Balkans. Latin faded, and Greek became the empire's administrative language. With its territory reduced and its cultural identity reshaped, the empire transitioned into what we now call the Byzantine Empire, though its citizens still thought of themselves as Romans. In the face of constant Arab raids, the empire adapted. A new military administrative structure, the theme system, transformed provinces into semi-autonomous districts where soldier farmers defended their own land. This innovation helped stabilize borders. The development of Greek fire, a mysterious and powerful incendiary weapon, gave the Byzantine navy a critical edge. During 2 major Arab sieges of Constantinople, the city's massive walls, combined with this terrifying naval weapon, held firm. These victories preserved the empire and prevented Islamic expansion into Europe. In the 8th and early 9th centuries, a new crisis emerged, not military, but spiritual. Emperors from Leo III to Theophilus began the iconoclastic movement, banning religious icons and images, fearing they bordered on idolatry. The resulting conflict tore at the fabric of society, alienated parts of the Christian world, and sparked tensions with the papacy. But in time, icons were restored, bringing unity and laying the groundwork for a cultural renaissance. Under the Macedonian dynasty, beginning with Basil I, the empire rebounded. Agricultural production increased, cities flourished again, and military strength returned. Though scarred by loss and crisis, the Byzantine Empire had survived, and was poised to thrive once more. Emperors like Nicephorus, Phocas, and John Tzimiskes led bold campaigns to reclaim lost lands, pushing the empire's frontiers deep into Syria. Basil II, known to history as the Bulgar Slayer, crushed resistance in the Balkans and reasserted imperial dominance over the region. Under their rule, the Byzantine Empire, Greek in language and culture but Roman in name, became the wealthiest and most advanced society in the Christian world. Constantinople, with its towering walls and 500,000 inhabitants, stood in stark contrast to the modest, fragmented towns of Western Europe. Exotic goods from China, Central Asia, and Scandinavia filled its bustling markets. Its churches glittered with golden mosaics, while its scholars meticulously preserved ancient Greek and Roman texts long forgotten in the West. Yet this golden age masked deepening fractures. The free peasantry, once the foundation of the empire's military power, lost their land to vast aristocratic estates, weakening the once formidable thematic armies. Bureaucratic offices increasingly became hereditary, eroding the meritocratic system that had sustained imperial administration. And tensions with the Latin West grew steadily worse as doctrinal, cultural, and political disputes widened the chasm between Catholic and Orthodox Christians. This divide became permanent with the Great Schism. The turning point came in 1071 at the Battle of Manzikert. There, the Seljuk Turks annihilated a Roman field army and captured Emperor Romanos IV Fort Diogenes, throwing open the heartland of Anatolia to Turkish settlement. At the same time, the Normans completed their conquest of southern Italy, and Pecheneg raids ravaged the northern frontier. An empire that had seemed invincible mere decades earlier was suddenly struggling for its life. In desperation, Emperor Alexios Komnenos reached out to the west, a plea that helped spark the First Crusade. Though the Crusaders reclaimed lands in the Holy Land, their contempt for Byzantium was clear. That contempt reached its horrifying peak during the Fourth Crusade when Western knights turned their swords on Constantinople itself. In 1204, the greatest Christian city in the world was sacked by fellow Christians, its treasures looted and its churches desecrated. A Latin empire rose in its place, leaving Byzantium fragmented and humiliated. Though Michael VIII Palaiologos restored imperial control over Constantinople in 1261, the city and empire were never the same. The treasury was empty. Trade had been commandeered by Italian merchant republics like Venice and Genoa. In the Balkans, new powers like Serbia and Bulgaria chipped away at imperial holdings. Worst of all, most of Anatolia, the empire's traditional heartland, was now in the hands of Turkish beyliks, with one in particular, the Ottomans, rising swiftly in strength. The Ottomans crossed into Europe and methodically surrounded Constantinople. Though the Byzantines sent embassies to Western courts, their pleas for help were largely ignored. When the final siege began in April 1453, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos stood with only a few thousand defenders against Sultan Mehmed II's massive army. For 7 agonizing weeks, the city's ancient Theodosian walls withstood relentless bombardment from massive Ottoman cannons. But on May 29, 1453, the defenses finally collapsed. In one final act of defiance, Constantine XI is said to have cast off his imperial regalia and died sword in hand among his troops. Mehmed the Conqueror entered the city in triumph and rode straight to the Hagia Sophia, which was converted into a mosque that same day. Thus ended the Roman Empire, 480 years after Augustus had claimed power. Yet the empire's legacy did not die with its capital. The Ottoman sultans styled themselves as Caesars, inheritors of Roman majesty. Far to the north, Moscow proclaimed itself the Third Rome, preserving Orthodox Christianity and imperial court traditions. In the West, Renaissance thinkers rediscovered the wisdom of antiquity through manuscripts saved by Byzantine refugees who fled to Italy before and after the fall. And through it all, Byzantium had served as the crucial bridge between antiquity and the Middle Ages. It preserved Roman law, safeguarded the works of Plato and Aristotle, and cultivated a theological tradition that shaped Christian doctrine for centuries. Its diplomacy, administration, and urban culture influenced societies from Eastern Europe to the Islamic world. The story that began with Romulus atop the Palatine Hill had at last drawn to a close. But Rome itself never truly vanished. It transformed, surviving in languages, legal codes, architecture, and institutions. As you drift towards sleep, Let your mind wander through the echoes of Roman greatness, the arches above your city streets, the words you read, the laws that shape your society, all testaments to an empire that, though fallen in name, lives on in spirit. Though the last emperor to bear the title of Caesar fell with the collapse of Constantinople in 1453, the influence of Rome has never truly disappeared. It echoes across the centuries, woven into the fabric of our laws, our languages, our cities, and our sense of what it means to be part of a civilization. As you settle into rest, let's take a moment to reflect on the extraordinary legacy of a people who reshaped the world in ways that still touch our lives today. Among Rome's most enduring contributions is its legal and governmental system. Unlike the rigid, limited codes of earlier societies, Roman law evolved into a flexible and far-reaching framework designed to manage the needs of a complex, multicultural empire. Ideas we consider fundamental today, such as the presumption of innocence, the importance of a defendant's intent, and the separation between civil and criminal law, can all trace their origins to Roman jurisprudence. These principles were preserved and refined under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century through his monumental compilation, the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal code that would shape European legal traditions for centuries. During the late medieval and early modern periods, as European nations built their own legal systems, many drew heavily on this Roman foundation. Today, the civil law tradition inspired by Rome governs much of continental Europe, Latin America, and regions of Africa and Asia. Even the English common law system, though developed along a separate path, absorbed countless Roman concepts over time. Beyond legal philosophy, the Romans pioneered practical governance at a scale never seen before. They created a structured bureaucracy with professional administrators, kept detailed records, enforced standardized weights and measures, conducted regular censuses, and implemented sophisticated taxation systems. These may seem like mundane innovations, but they formed the invisible machinery that made vast, stable societies possible. The Roman idea of citizenship, where rights were tied not to ethnicity but to a recognized legal status, offered a vision of inclusion. While imperfect in practice, this concept allowed Rome to integrate diverse peoples and extend its reach with loyalty, not just conquest. In the realm of language, Rome's imprint is nothing short of monumental. Latin, once the speech of humble farmers along the Tiber River, became the lingua franca of Western civilization for over 1,000 years. Though no longer spoken natively, its legacy lives on through its descendants, the Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian, spoken by nearly 1 billion people today. Even languages not directly descended from Latin, like English, bear its deep imprint. Roughly 60% of English vocabulary derives from Latin, either directly or via French, making Latin the silent engine behind much of modern communication. In science, medicine, law, and academia, Latin remains the global vocabulary that crosses borders and unites scholars. Roman literature also laid the foundation for Western storytelling. Virgil's Aeneid became the model for epic poetry, inspiring figures from Dante to Milton. Ovid's playful and profound metamorphoses fed the imagination of Shakespeare and countless others. Cicero's political speeches set the standard for persuasive oratory, while Seneca's tragedies and philosophical writings shaped the dramatic forms of the Renaissance. The letters of Pliny the Younger and the sharp historical insights of Tacitus still shape how we think about the past and how we write about it. Then there is the physical legacy. Roman engineering transformed the Mediterranean world with roads, aqueducts, bridges, and monuments built on a scale and with a precision unmatched in their time. Many Roman roads still lie beneath our modern highways, their routes so intelligently planned that even satellites couldn't improve on them. Roman aqueducts supplied cities with clean water for centuries. One in Segovia, Spain, remained in use into the 20th century. Architecturally, the Romans revolutionized the built environment. By refining the use of the arch, vault, and dome, they made it possible to build vast, lasting structures. And their development of concrete gave birth to a material so durable that many Roman buildings have survived more than 2,000 years of earthquakes, floods, and war. In every stone, every page of law, every turn of phrase, and every shared ideal of governance, Rome still speaks to us. It reminds us that civilizations may fall, but their ideas can endure, shaping the minds, laws, and dreams of those who come after. The Pantheon in Rome, with its perfect dome and central oculus open to the sky, stands not just as a marvel of ancient engineering, but as a timeless symbol of architectural genius. Its influence echoes from the Renaissance to the skyscrapers and domes of our modern world. Just as enduring as Rome's military legacy, the Roman legion, a disciplined and flexible force combining heavy infantry with specialized units, set a standard unmatched in the ancient world. It wasn't raw courage or numbers that brought victory, but coordination, engineering, logistics, and relentless training, principles that continue to shape military doctrines today. Even now, generals and students of war study Caesar's campaigns for their strategic brilliance and tactical clarity. Rome's political legacy, however, is more complicated. The Roman Republic, with its intricate system of checks and balances, term limits, and separation of powers, inspired the founders of modern democracies, especially the architects of the American Constitution. And yet, Rome also teaches a cautionary tale: how those same republican systems could be eroded by ambition, how liberty could be sacrificed in the name of security, and how a republic could fall into empire. The imperial system that followed brought both order and oppression. At its best, the Roman Empire offered peace, prosperity, and justice to a diverse population across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. At its worst, it embodied tyranny, corruption, and cruelty on a vast scale. Perhaps no legacy of Rome has been more far-reaching than its role in spreading Christianity. The early Christians traveled the empire's roads and sailed its trade routes, sharing their message in cities built by Roman hands. After Emperor Constantine's conversion, the empire's administrative structure became the skeleton of the church's own hierarchy. Roman provinces turned into Christian dioceses, and even the ancient title of Pontifex Maximus, once held by emperors as chief priest, passed to the popes. Rome's cultural legacy is as much about preservation as creation. Roman artists, thinkers, and scholars adapted Greek models, but in doing so, they ensured that the philosophy, science, and art of classical Greece would survive. Without Roman stewardship, much of that tradition might have vanished. The very idea of Rome became a political talisman long after the empire's fall. Charlemagne was crowned Roman emperor in 800. The Byzantine rulers saw themselves as the true Romans. The Russian czars called Moscow the Third Rome. Even modern regimes like Mussolini's Italy and Nazi Germany invoked Roman imagery in their architecture and propaganda, testaments to the lasting, if sometimes twisted, power of Roman symbolism. Yet among all these inheritances, perhaps the most profound is Rome's cosmopolitan ideal. The belief that people of different ethnicities, languages, and religions could belong to a single legal and political community. It was an imperfect dream, sometimes brutally enforced, but it left a powerful blueprint for pluralistic societies today. Rome also showed the extremes of human potential. It gave us the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, but also the madness of Caligula. It raised magnificent temples, but also staged blood sports for mass entertainment. In this duality lies Rome's greatest lesson: that civilization is always a mix of the noble and the flawed, of progress and peril. As you drift deeper into sleep, think of how differently our world might look without Rome. Our languages, our systems of law, the structures we live and work in, the governments we serve under, and the religions we follow, all bear the marks of Rome. Its influence surrounds us, often in ways we don't see, shaping our past, our present, and even our dreams. From the names of our months to the very structure of our governments, echoes of Rome still shape the world we live in. The Roman story, spanning more than 2,000 years, from the myth of Romulus to the fall of Constantinople, is more than just a tale of conquests and emperors. It is a testament to human ambition, endurance, and transformation. Through wars and reforms, golden ages and collapses, Rome constantly evolved while staying tethered to its past. Even after the empire disappeared as a political force, its influence never truly ended. Its laws, languages, and ideals became the foundation of the world that followed. As you drift into sleep, let that continuity bring comfort. The same stars that watched over Augustus as he reshaped a city of brick into one of marble now shine quietly above us. The same longings for safety, for meaning, for beauty, those ancient Roman dreams, still live within us. And in that unbroken thread of shared humanity lies Rome's most lasting gift. If this journey through history has inspired you, we invite you to subscribe to Nocturne Historia. There are more stories to explore, more echoes from the past to discover. Let us continue this timeless voyage together.